All right, I'm told that the webinar is being recorded now. I haven't heard the webinar recording. So hello, everyone. My name is Tekao Frère. I'm advisor to the Pacific Ocean Commissioner, who will join a little bit later. We're delighted to have this webinar to introduce what the region is planning to support our countries for the BBNJ agreement ratification, domestication, and implementation. As you know, the first party to the agreement is from our very own region, Palau, and we congratulate them. I will not be reading what the commissioner notes are, again, because we want to start into substance now. When you signed into the webinar, you were asked to fill some questions about what you wanted to hear from this webinar and maybe in subsequent activities. We have shared those questions with our presenters, and so most of them will be addressed today. For those that are not, we hope to have some times at the end of this webinar to discuss, but nonetheless, fear not, we will have many opportunities to dive further into specific topics. Also, should you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A function or send us an email, and you will also have an opportunity after the webinar to provide more questions that you will like for us to dig further into. Okay, so before we discuss what OPOC and the region is planning, who the partners for implementation of these programs are, we need to know what is this BBNJ agreement and what does it represent to the region. We, unfortunately, will not be able to go in very much specific details about that, but we will be providing, or we will have 6 experts providing us with an overview of the history of the process, as well as what the process is, what the agreement is and what it represents for the region. Our first presenter is Charlotte Salpin, a senior legal officer at the Division of Ocean Affairs and the Law of the Sea at the Office of Legal Affairs of the United Nations, where she has worked for nearly 20 years. A former senior legal officer at the International Seabed Authority, she also previously worked at the United Nations Environmental Program and as a consultant to the International Institute for Sustainable Development. Her current areas of focus include the legal aspects of BBNJ, the protection and preservation of the marine environment, and marine scientific research. She previously worked on the legal aspects of fisheries, maritime delimitation, dispute settlement, as well as compliance and enforcement with environmental law. Charlotte has followed the BBNJ process since its inception in 2004 in various capacities. Most recently, she led the team supporting the Intergovernmental Conference. Charlotte is also not foreign to the Pacific, as she attended some BBNJ-related preparatory work in the region. She holds an advanced postgraduate university degree in public international law from Paris II University and an LLM in environmental law from London University. She has authored and co-authored articles and publications on various aspects of international law, in particular BBNJ and environmental law. And we're delighted to have Charlotte with us today, and we will be sharing her presentation. Mere, please. And please, Charlotte, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Tekao. I was hoping you would actually shorten the bio, but I see you went for the full version. Thank you very much. Good morning to all. Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today for this webinar. Next, please. So today I've been asked to give you a brief overview of the agreement, the history of the negotiation process, and the next steps. Next, please. But let me first situate the agreement within the broader context of ocean governance and the law of the sea. The agreement has become the third implementing agreement to the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which provides the legal framework within which all activities in the oceans and seas must be carried out. It is known as the Constitution for the Ocean, as it sets out the limits of the various maritime zones, as well as the rights and obligations of states in those zones. Up to now, there were 2 implementing agreements to UNCLOS. the 1994 agreement relating to the implementation of Part 11 of UNCLOS, which addresses the exploration for and exploitation of mineral resources in the international seabed area, and the 1995 UN Fish Stocks Agreement, which relates to the conservation and sustainable use of straddling fish stocks and highly migratory fish stocks. It's interesting to note actually that all three implementing agreements are related to areas beyond national jurisdiction. Next, please. It may also be useful to recall what geographic areas are covered by the BBNJ agreement. Under UNCLOS, as you may know, ocean space is divided into various maritime zones, which are illustrated on the screen. Two such zones are areas beyond national jurisdiction, and this is what the BBNJ agreement covers. The first is the high seas, which include all parts of the seas that are not included in the exclusive economic zone, the territorial sea, or the internal waters of a state, or in the archipelagic waters of an archipelagic state. The freedom of the high seas applies in that zone. The second is the international seabed area, also known as the area with a capital A, which is the seabed and ocean floor and subsoil thereof beyond the limits of national jurisdiction. The common heritage of humankind applies to the area and its resources. As such, the use of High Seas Treaty, which is often used for communication purposes to refer to the BBNJ agreement, is actually misleading, as this ignores one of the two zones that are actually covered by the agreement. By surface area, nearly 2/3 of the ocean are areas beyond national jurisdiction. Next, please. These areas are home to rich biodiversity and unique marine species. They provide the planet and humankind with many goods and services, as we may know, from the fish we eat to the regulation of the global climate cycle. Yet, they are vastly underexplored and have traditionally suffered from little attention and funding in terms of research. These are also areas which are subjected to cumulative anthropogenic pressures, from destructive fishing practices to pollution of all kinds and the effects of climate change. Next, please. I will just check in this area. Oh, it's interesting to see. It's all very colorful on your side. I don't have those colors. That's great. In these areas, several regional and global organizations have competence for a number of sectoral activities. But up to now, there was no overall cross-sectoral mechanism, in particular to address cumulative impacts of human activities. Some regulatory gaps also existed. The UN General Assembly, which you can see at the center there, provides overall cross-sectoral policy guidance, but it is not a management body. So cognizant of this situation and the need to enhance the conservation and sustainable use of BBNJ, the UN General Assembly launched discussions in 2004 to study various aspects of the issue, as well as ways to enhance international cooperation and coordination. As part of an iterative process taking place in different formats, the UNGA convened in 2017 an intergovernmental conference to elaborate the text of an international legally binding instrument. 5 sessions of the conference were held between 2018 and 2023. The conference, as you know, concluded its work with the adoption of the BBNJ agreement in June last year. Next, please. So I just want to highlight here this part of the negotiating process, not necessarily because it has great value at this point in time, but just to highlight the role of Pacific states during the process. The president of the conference, Mrs. Rina Lee of Singapore, was assisted by a bureau of 15 members, including 3 members from the Asia-Pacific group, one of them being the Federated States of Micronesia. She was also assisted by a number of facilitators to facilitate discussions in the various informal working groups and informal informals, which were established to address each of the elements of the package under negotiation. Over the life of the conference, the Pacific actually provided 3 facilitators to that end on area-based management tools, on capacity building and the transfer of marine technology, and on some cross-cutting issues, namely implementation and compliance and dispute settlement. Next, please. So what is in the agreement? The agreement addresses a package of 4 key issues and a number of cross-cutting issues under the overall objective of ensuring the conservation and sustainable use of BBNJ for the present and in the long term. The 4 key issues are marine genetic resources, including the fair and equitable sharing of benefits, area-based management tools, including marine protected areas, environmental impact assessments, and capacity building and the transfer of marine technology. Next, please. The cross-cutting issues that are addressed in the agreement are listed on this slide, and you will hear more about those in a later presentation. Next, please. So what is the status of the agreement? On 20th September last year, the agreement opened for signature for 2 years. It will enter into force after the deposit of the 60th instrument of ratification, approval, acceptance, or accession. In his remarks at the adoption of the agreement, the Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, called on all states to act without delay to sign and ratify it as soon as possible. As of today, there are 86 signatories to the agreement. That's 85 states and the European Union. 1 Pacific SIDS, as Tekao has mentioned, Palau, has become the first state to deposit its instrument of ratification on Monday last week, and therefore has become the first party to the agreement. So congratulations to Palau. This slide shows the distribution of these signatories by regional groups of the UN and 3 others who are not UN members. Next, please. These signatories include 13 states from the Pacific. Next, please. These signatories also include developing states from different categories identified in the agreement as shown on this slide, and these include 22 small island developing states. Next, please. So how to become party to the agreement? Let me note that when a multilateral treaty is subject to ratification, approval, or acceptance, a signatory does not become a party to that treaty through signature alone. Signature indicates the intention of the signatory to take steps to express its consent to be bound by the agreement at a later date, which may be done in the form of ratification, approval, or acceptance. Signature, however, of course, is not devoid of legal effect, as it creates an obligation on the signatory to refrain in good faith from acts that would defeat the object and purpose of the agreement. Generally, there is no time limit within which ratification should take place following signature. Thus, those that have signed or will sign the agreement up to 20th September 2025, for them, ratification may take place even after 20th September 2025. From 21st September 2025, that is after the period for signature has closed, those wishing to become party to the agreement may do so through the single-step process of accession. Next, please. Ratification, approval, acceptance, or accession to at the international level should not be confused with ratification, approval, acceptance, or accession at the domestic level. At the international level, the consent to be bound by the agreement must be expressed through the deposit of an instrument of ratification, approval, acceptance, or accession with the Secretary General of the UN. For the latter, DOALOS circulated among delegations earlier this week a model instrument of ratification, approval, or acceptance. Next, please. Before I conclude, let me touch upon some of the next steps. The agreement provides that until such time as a secretariat to be established under the agreement commences its functions, the Secretary General of the UN, through the division which I represent, DOALOS, shall perform the secretariat functions under the agreement. The first meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the Agreement will need to be convened by the UN Secretary General within 1 year following the entry into force of the agreement. Delegations are now engaged in consultations to establish a preparatory process to prepare for entry into force, including for the first meeting of the Conference of the Parties. Meanwhile, of course, some of the most immediate next steps include promoting a better understanding of the agreement and supporting the efforts of states towards becoming parties to the agreement. I will touch upon the program of activities that DOALOS has developed to that end in a later part of this webinar. For now, I just wish to note that in cooperation with the Global Environment Facility, which has allocated $34 million for ratification support and implementation readiness, DOALOS circulated earlier in January an initial capacity needs assessment survey to all permanent missions in New York with a view to informing the development of future assistance. So I would really highly recommend that you fill in the survey to assist not only DOALOS, but the GEF and possibly other donors in the development of their activities. Next, please. I will end this presentation with a couple of takeaways in terms of the benefits to be derived from becoming a party to the agreement. The first, of course, is a collective point, and that is that the entry into force of the agreement, while it requires 60 states to ratify it, will only work most effectively with universal participation. So the key benefit to ratification is indeed a collective one, and that is the health and resilience of the ocean. However, of course, states also benefit individually from the provisions of the agreement. For example, becoming party opens up opportunities to get a share in the benefits from activities with respect to marine genetic resources and digital sequence information, as well as from increased cooperation in capacity building and transfer of marine technology, in particular strong and funded capacity building. In addition, only parties to the agreement will be able to participate in decision-making of the Conference of the Parties, including in relation to benefit sharing from activities with respect to marine genetic resources, and with regard, for example, to the establishment of area-based management tools, including marine protected areas. Some of the specific benefits to Pacific states will no doubt be outlined by the presenters that will speak shortly after this presentation. And next slide, please. This concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Apologies, everyone. I made a mistake while pasting Charlotte's presentation. So that's why the last slides didn't show. I apologize for that. So thank you very much for providing an overview of the process and the agreement and the next steps, Charlotte. Now we wanted to focus on what the agreement means for the Pacific. And for that, we have invited some of the core team who advance and secure Pacific interest into the agreement. Our next speaker is, like Charlotte, a very seasoned ocean process participant. As a matter of fact, I think she's one of the very few people that I know that exist to have attended every single meeting of the BBNJ process, even before it became a process. Joan Yang, a woman of many hats and many lives, have held many positions, starting with Deputy Permanent Representative of Palau at the UN, and now serving as advisor to Pacific Island countries. A common element in all those positions that she's held, supporting Pacific engagement on ocean issues. And we owe her a lot, including, in my view, that she was very instrumental in securing SDG 14, as well as the BBNJ agreement. And that's only the tip of the iceberg. During the BBNJ negotiation, Joan, as advisor to the permanent mission of Nauru to the UN, served as Pacific SIDS coordinator on cross-cutting issues. And so now she will present on that. Joan, please.
Thank you very much, Takao. I feel like that was a little bit of an oversell of myself and my background. But good morning to all, and thank you very much for having me today. It's a delight to be able to talk about this issue that I have been working on for a long time. Treaty discussions are not always the most engaging, but I will try not to be too dull. As noted by Takao, I had the honor to assist with cross-cutting coordination for the PCIDS during the BBNJ IGC. And I'm just going to assume that it's okay to call it BBNJ, but that was the shorthand name for the treaty and for the work in the time that we were getting ready to agree the final agreement. And the focus of what I'll discuss today, or make an attempt at, is to talk to the elements that and PCID's priorities for the cross-cutting parts. So as a background, the cross-cutting elements are what holds the instrument together. And with the capacity building and transfer of marine technology part, they are supposed to support the work of the agreement as a whole. So cross-cutting will include things like the general provisions, which are objectives, principles, and approaches, et cetera. Things like the institutional arrangements, which is what bodies we're going to put in place to make the instrument work. How we're going to deal with disputes when and if they arise, as well as provisions related to non-parties' good faith. And then, as is usual for treaties, we have final provisions. So next slide, please. All right. So this slide is a lot. It's a lot of text. On it, you'll see in the middle the general objective of our new agreement. And it's to ensure the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity beyond national jurisdictions for the present and in the long term, through effective implementation of relevant provisions of the convention and further international cooperation and coordination. And something that's important to note is that we're supposed to be taking urgent measures now, right? That's the present piece of it. And then we're also supposed to be considering lasting effects and impacts, which is the long-term piece. That was a compromise that was brokered because people had different readings of what the various words may mean. And we want to ensure that we try to capture it all. The rest of the text on the slide is drawn from Article 7, which is general principles and approaches. And here you'll find some really important environmental principles and approaches. For example, polluter pays, precaution, ecosystem approach, integrated approach, and the duty not to transfer environmental harm are among those principles here. And I will also note briefly that given the importance to the Pacific region of addressing climate change, it shouldn't come as a surprise to hear that the PCIDS prioritize inclusion of language around the importance of climate change and factoring it into decisions throughout the agreement. So here you can see it in H on ecosystem resilience, and others from the panel will speak to how it was factored into other parts of the agreement. Next slide, please. Okay, before we leave Article 7, I wanted to highlight a few additional elements. So equity is a principle that contemplates fairness in the implementation of international law. In our view, it is linked with the principle that we, as small island developing states, have been promoting for over 30 years, and that is the recognition of the special circumstances that we face. So the Pacific fought very hard during the PrepCom and the IGC for this to be recognized, and its inclusion is a major victory, and we think really important to the agreement. And then related to this is text around special circumstances of SIDS in this principles section. So this full recognition as a new principle or approach in international law provides for targeted considerations and support for small island developing states and least developed countries. And this isn't the only place where you'll see specific references to SIDS across the agreement. but others will speak to those. So sorry, the slides got a little ahead of me. Now the next slide, please. All right, thank you so much. Another priority area for our group was the proper reflection of traditional knowledge of Indigenous peoples and local communities. And for the rest of this, I may just say IPLCs because there are some time constraints. But the rights, roles, and interests of IPLCs in relation to the BBNJ agreement are embedded in the final text. And that includes recognition of the complementarity between best available science and scientific information and the use of relevant traditional knowledge of IPLCs where available. And so you'll see both of these in Article 7. And then as a testimony to the importance of this recognition, the scientific and technical body, which is in a different part of the cross-cutting sections of the agreement, the scientific and technical body is to include expertise in relevant traditional knowledge of Indigenous people and local communities. Now, the instrument also recognizes the rights of Indigenous peoples or of as appropriate local communities. You'll see that in the preamble, and it's also in Article 7. Indigenous peoples and local communities are also recognized as stakeholders for funding and for dissemination of information related to implementation of the provisions of the instrument. And as an important category of stakeholders, IPLC also have the possibility to be observers to the Conference of the Parties, or COP. Next slide, please. Adjacency was another priority area for the group. And this was based in part on our position and our beliefs that what happens outside of our borders is of particular interest to us as coastal states. And we should, at a minimum, be actively informed and consulted when projects regarding areas beyond our borders, including high seas pockets, are contemplated. So while the Pacific had originally suggested this for inclusion in Article 7, it's not there, but the concept is operationalized in other parts of the agreement. Next slide. Thank you. So, not undermining is what we called this up until we kind of inked it in the final text. And as Charlotte referenced, and as many people who are part of this will know, the International Ocean Governance Framework is complex and it has been built up over years and years. And there were concerns from some that the new agreement could overtake other instruments and add another layer of bureaucracy. But weighed against that is the reality that excluding sectors or places from the agreement could have a negative effect on our interests and on our ability to obtain the objectives of the agreement. So all relevant sectors need to be incorporated. And this is why not undermining as concept was critical and a part of the conversation since the very beginning of the discussions. So essentially, the agreement provides that other institution frameworks and bodies are to be consulted with and that their measures are to be built upon. And this means that the BBNJ agreement would coordinate with these other bodies to bring coherence to and in global ocean governance. So, for example, the Conference of the Parties, or COP, is to promote cooperation and coordination with and among relevant legal instruments and frameworks and relevant global, regional, sub-regional, and sectoral bodies. Now, I understand that there was a question regarding RFMOs in the fisheries sector sent in, and maybe I'll use that as an example. So the PIF, Pacific Island Forum leaders, made clear that their support to the BBNJ instrument was contingent on the assurances that fishing interests wouldn't be undermined. And so Article 5 should give some comfort to these concerns. All right, next slide. Institutional arrangements, possibly boring, but I personally really enjoyed working on this part. And you can see here a mapping out of kind of the institutional arrangements. Now, at the center of this all is the governing body, which is the Conference of the Parties. And it will meet for the first time, as Charlotte also noted, within a year of entry into force. And the decisions at the Conference of the Party will hopefully be taken by consensus. But if all efforts to reach consensus fail, then there are provisions for voting included. And the voting provisions vary a little bit depending on the type of decision we're going to be taking. Now, the idea and the issue around voting was really important for the Pacific, as we didn't want this body to fall to the lowest common denominator, which can sometimes happen if consensus is the only way forward. Another power of the Conference of the Parties, which was important for PCIDS, was the ability to request advisory opinions from the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, or ITLAS, and we were very pleased that it made it into the final text. So another really important body that we agreed to in the agreement is, as I referenced before, the scientific and technical body, which is to be guided by best available science and scientific information and by traditional knowledge. And as I noted earlier, scientific, technical, and experts in traditional knowledge can be members of the body. We also will need a secretariat. DOALIS is to function as the interim secretariat, and a new permanent secretariat can be established. Currently, 2 countries have indicated openness to host the secretariat, and so the competition is on. But we will not take that decision for some time. To support the implementation of the instrument, an implementation and compliance committee is also established in Part 8. It is to be facilitative, transparent, non-adversarial, and non-punitive. And this proposal for an implementation and compliance committee was strongly supported by the Pacific, and we were co-sponsors of the original proposal. Next slide. Oh no, that's a whole different presentation. Okay, maybe we don't have a slide on it. But last but not least, the money. So the instrument does establish a financial mechanism. That's Article 52 for anybody who would like to read it. And it's composed of a series of funds, including a trust fund to support participation to meeting by developing countries, in particular SIDS, a special fund, which will get funded through contributions from developed parties and payments from monetary benefits arising from the use and commercialization of marine genetic resources and digital sequence information, or DSI. And also a Global Environmental Facility, or GEF trust fund. Now, the COP may also, or the Conference of the Parties may also decide to establish other funds, such as for rehabilitation and restoration. And this was a position promoted actually by the PCIDS during the PrepCom and at the early stages of the IGC. And I believe that Khalil, who will be speaking in a little bit, will also touch on this issue. And an interesting element too for funding is the inclusion in the agreement of work for the Conference of the Parties to determine an initial resource mobilization goal to run through 2030. Okay, thank you all for not falling asleep during that. I believe there's time for Q&A at the end, and that's all from me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joan. Apologies for the slide. I think it was too complex, so we decided to disappear, but it will be in the final document that will be shared with participants and on the website. Apologies for that. I don't think it was boring, but it certainly sets the complexity. And talking about complexity, I want to say, hold on to your seat for the next presentation, which I'm sure our next presenter will make it sound much less complex. Miss Rose Kautoke is Senior Crown Counsel at the Attorney General's Office of the Kingdom of Tonga. Rose started following the BBNJ Agreement in 2016 when she was Ocean Fellow at the Permanent Mission of Tonga to the UN. Obviously, that did not deter her, and she continued to be actively engaged in the process, taking on the role of co-coordinator on MGR discussions for the Pacific, as well as on discussions on the special circumstances of SIDS. You might be wondering, what is MGR? Well, fear not, you are in very good hands to know a bit more about this extremely complex, it's not the most complex part of the agreement. Rose, please.
Thank you very much, Sakao. Just checking if you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much, OPOC, for organizing this. And thank you to the two senior presenters and experts. I really do hope that I do not put the audience to sleep, but this is quite technical and complex. And I just want to acknowledge IUCN, OPOC, and Shiva for the information that they provided that has helped to try and simplify this very complex part. So part 2 of the BBNJ Agreement is on marine genetic resources, including the fair and equitable sharing of benefits. Firstly, just to give a brief overview, my presentation will be divided into 7 main parts. And I just wanted to begin with this excerpt taken from the IUCN policy brief, which I think is an accurate way of reflecting what part 2 of the agreement intends to do. And I just want to highlight that these are just preliminary overviews of what is in the agreement. And there are a lot of different modalities that are going to be developed by the COP. So basically, it aims to balance the fair and equitable sharing of marine genetic resources and its benefits with as few burdens on marine scientific research. And what it does is that it provides a set of rules of how activities relating to MGRs, that's the short for marine genetic resources, and digital sequence information of marine genetic resources of areas beyond national jurisdiction will be governed, and how the monetary and non-monetary benefits will be shared to further the objectives of the agreement. So that in a nutshell basically is what this particular part intends to do. So part 2 has a total of 8 articles, and it starts from Article 9 to 16, but then just highlighting again that the other general articles that were mentioned by Joan are also important, in particular the general principles articles and Article 52, which establishes the special fund. The objectives of this part are just covered in 4 main points. And the first is to, again, ensure fair and equitable sharing of benefits. And you may, for those who are involved in CBD, Convention of Biological Diversity, and the Nagoya Protocol, there's similarities with this particular framework. So it's a fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from activities with respect to MGRs and DSI. From areas beyond national jurisdiction, and for the purpose of conserving and sustainably using marine biological diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction. And the second is to build the capacity of developing countries, and there's mention of small island developing states, to carry out activities with respect to MGRs and DSI. The third is the generation of knowledge, scientific understanding, and technical innovation development and conduct of marine scientific research as fundamental contributions to the implementation of the agreement. And finally, the development and transfer of marine technology. So what does this part cover? So it covers marine genetic resources of areas beyond national jurisdiction, and just taking you back to Charlotte's presentation where she highlighted the geographic scope. And it also covers digital sequence information of marine genetic resources of areas beyond national jurisdiction. So MGRs is defined as material of plant, animal, microbial, or other origin containing functional units of heredity or of actual or potential value. DSI is not defined, and basically negotiators followed CBD's lead in not defining it. And according to the some briefs that I've read, derivatives are also covered, derivatives of living organisms, is set out in the definition of the utilization of MGLs, which is covered on Article 1, and through the link to biotechnology, which is also defined on Article 1. It will apply to, but does not apply to fishing activities or government vessels. So that was the intention to protect, particularly for the Pacific, our fisheries interests. It will, but there's an exception if living marine resources collected through these activities are later utilized as MGRs, and then it will fall within the scope of this activity. How are we going to do that? That is yet to be elaborated, I guess, by the Conference of the Parties. So who can undertake activities with regards to MGRs? So state parties, natural or juridical persons under their jurisdictions of the state parties, and any other vessels flying their flags. So general obligations, I tried my best just to summarize some of the main points that state parties are required to do. And of course, the first and foremost is to adopt legislative, policy, and administrative measures to implement the requirements of Part 2 and the agreement in general. There are notification requirements, in particular to some of the institutions that will be established. There are reporting obligations and also information sharing obligations. And this I have taken from the IUCN policy brief, which it is quite a difficult and complex part, but I think this is a great preliminary illustration of what it intends to do. And then you can see from the parties, the legislative, administrative, and policy measures, and then each party will deposit samples within their repositories or databases. This can be national or international, and there will be biannual aggregate reports on access together with a BBNJ batch identifier. I hope there are a lot of scientists online because I know they will understand what I'm talking about, but basically it's to try and trace that whatever MGR or DSI originated from ABNJ, you could somewhat trace it through the BBNJ batch identifier. And so you also see some of the institutions that will be established, and which Joan had mentioned. So you have the clearinghouse mechanism, you have the special fund, of course, the Conference of the Parties, and you have the Access and Benefit Sharing Committee, who will determine and recommend to Conference of the Party how any benefits arising from the utilization of marine genetic resources will be shared amongst the parties through the special fund. So the areas that are yet to be developed, so there's the modalities for the sharing of monetary benefits, which I just mentioned, and specifically from the utilization of MGRs and DSI. And the modalities will be determined by the Conference of the Parties upon the recommendation of the Access and Benefit Sharing Committee. And of course, the establishment and operationalization of the institutional mechanisms, such as the clearinghouse mechanism, Access and Benefit Sharing Committee, and the special fund. So these are all important for this particular part. And thirdly, modalities for the access to marine genetic resources and DSI that are subject to commercialization or utilization. So what are the benefits? So some of the benefits as it relates to the region, I guess, is that we worked hard collectively to ensure that it aligns with the regional priorities and complements our conservation measures and efforts. They're the protection of fisheries interests, access to marine genetic resources and DSI. And I think that's an important sort of like capacity opportunity for our young scientists in the Pacific. The recognition of traditional knowledge of the indigenous peoples and local communities, IPLCs, as Joan had mentioned. Capacity development in the field of MGRs and DSI. Access to samples and sample collections, which is, I understand, is very useful for scientific studies, transfer of marine technology. There's funding, financing, research opportunities, partnership opportunities, and increased technical and scientific cooperation with developing countries. And I'm sure those of us here in the Pacific. So just to conclude, that's a very brief attempt in trying to simplify this complex area, part 2. And again, just highlighting it's preliminary, and this will evolve as we progress throughout the year. So in concluding my presentation, the BBNJ Agreement is an essential agreement for the Pacific, and I'm so happy that Tonga has finally signed the BBNJ Agreement. Secondly, part 2 on marine genetic resources unlocks a potential area we can really enhance our scientific and technical capacity within the region. And we have much to contribute and to benefit from this particular part. And finally, collaboration towards ratification will be vital, and with the assistance of OPOC and crop agencies and others, NGOs, international governmental organizations, will be able to deliver on the promises of the agreement. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you once again. And I will attempt to answer questions that may be raised in relation to this part. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rose, for making this sound so easy, or at least less complex. So thank you so much. And again, congratulations, Tonga, on signing. I hope everyone is doing well. Our next presenter has been working with the UN since last century and has worked for the permanent mission of the Federated States of Micronesia for close to 20 years. As Second Secretary, Martin Zvashula has led a lot of groundwork for the PSIDs at the UN. For BBNJ in particular, Martin coordinated and led the negotiations on behalf of PSIDs for Part 3 about ABMTs and MPA. He has also gained an international fan club for his wit and his ability to release tension with jokes. I was a little bit reluctant to give him the mic today, but he promised to keep within the time limit. So Martin, I'm very delighted to invite you to the floor.
Thank you very much. And first of all, I hope you can hear me, and I hope you can see the presentation.
Yes,
and
yes.
And yes, I'm timing myself. So basically, one of the limitations that we had in our own regions is we were always able to legislate area-based management tools and marine protected areas within our own jurisdictions. We had ventured to some degree into the high seas pockets, but we didn't really have a comprehensive tool set on how to go beyond that. And that is something that the BBNJ agreement is actually venturing into. The last presentation I did was basically about what things did we get, what didn't we get. So today I'm actually, since the purpose was about implementation, I'll be looking at what do you actually have to do if you want to do an area-based management tool or an MPA in areas beyond national jurisdiction. So the first one is, who can do it? And the implementing a treaty is pretty clear on that. It is a function of a state. It can be an individual state. It can be, and that was because of the Pacific, it can be states collectively. Also, also because of the Pacific, it can be done together with others. Like we can do it together with crops. We can include civil society, academia, and of course, indigenous peoples and local communities. The reason we can do it together is, or why we have argued for that, was we're small states. We might need help. We need to bundle all our resources. But no matter what, at least one state needs to be involved in any proposal. Now, before you even start, the things that you would want to do, and in the Pacific, we're pretty good at that, is talk to each other. Regionally, sub-regionally, you're going to have workshops, you're going to have meetings, involve other stakeholders. There is a lot of people out there that want to help. Talk with your neighbors. And also see who else has an interest in the wider world. Once you start writing a proposal for an area-based management tool or for an MPA, what do you need to write? And here, the negotiating team has kind of come full circle. In earlier drafts, there was many good points where we were like, oh yes, this is great. We should include this and we should include that and this and that and that. And at some point, there was like a requirement of 17 different things that you should meet. And at that point, we realized if you need all of those, there will never, ever be a single tool or MPA. So it was condensed down to the bare minimum, which is basically what's reflective in the treaty now. Where is it? And the where is really asking about spatial coordinates. There is no specific provisions for like an MPA that could be adjusted based on changing realities, but it's also not prevented. You need to describe what is in the area, like what is the biodiversity that you're trying to protect, but also what activities are carried out. Is there shipping? Is there like traditional navigation going on? You would have to define what is the goal of what you would like to protect. How are you going to achieve it? What are the means? And how do you actually measure whether you're achieving what you're setting out to do? So once you have put all of that into a proposal, now comes the moment of truth. You submit your proposal. So that goes actually to the Secretariat to be established. And under the agreement, it will be published. So it will already be out in the open. But it's not going to be part to universal scrutiny yet. There will be a preliminary review to be carried out by the scientific and technical body. I have to say, don't ask me too much about that because our group was not too thrilled about that. It came from somebody else and it stuck. The preliminary review is not about substance. It's supposed to be, does it fulfill all the actual criteria? After the review, are you gonna tweak it? Maybe yes, maybe no. And then it goes out to the wider public. Means after that, everyone, like all the countries as well as all the other actors, will then have an opportunity to react to your proposal. And then, of course, for you to look at what are they saying, what do we take into account, and what don't we take into account. And for that, there is a whole consultation process. One thing that the Pacific has promoted was that the consultations should be for everyone. Everyone can give their piece. We had put in, since there was a question that I saw earlier in the chat on what this, no, I'm sorry, that never mind that. For the high seas pockets, we actually put in a special provision. Hey, if someone proposes something and that's your high seas pocket, they better be talking to you and they better take into account what you're saying. The process itself is time bound, but the implementing agreement does not specify the actual limit. The idea was that based on the complexity of the submission, that would really determine whether you need like 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. The final decision on whether consultations have to continue or are done, that lies with the proponent. So if it's your proposal, you can say, okay, that's enough talking. We want it adopted now. Decision making. The big step forward in the ABMT and MPA part under this agreement is that it gives us one thing that we did not have before. You can establish an area-based management tool or an MPA in its own right under that treaty. You don't have to necessarily go anywhere else. It gets then a little more complex because you can do that. But if you have a competent regional organization or a fisheries management one that hasn't been as active as you would want it to do, you can actually send them a recommendation through the conference of party. You can also do something about compatibility, means you have something within your own borders and you want something in the high seas next door. Voting, and I see I'm running out of time, is by a 3/4 majority. That's the highest I've ever seen. That was a balance because on the one hand, we didn't want to have a scenario where we bully someone, but we also didn't want to have a scenario where a single country could hold up every single decision. There is an opt-out clause that was not a favorite of the Pacific. And now I'll come back to something that I had seen posted on, I think it was the Q&A earlier on. What about the extended continental shelf? Technically, BBNJ cannot legislate that, and the agreement is pretty clear about that. That's your own jurisdiction. But it does not live in a vacuum. There is a high seas column on top that belongs to humanity. So what if someone wants to like do stuff in the column that would actually prevent you from accessing your own resources? Now, for that, we have provisions about how they should consult with you, that they have to give you an answer. That does not give anyone a veto right. That also means if you are really unhappy, you can call for a vote and they need a 3/4 majority. And finally, there is the possibility for you to opt out. So hopefully we're reasonably safe. I'll skip the next part and just say the most important things right now, of course, is to sign and to ratify. Congratulations, Palau. Congratulations, Tonga. We are working on a resolution to have another prep process before COP1 to at least do whatever homework can be done. More on this later. For ABMTs, I would also say, don't wait for 2030. If you have ideas for an area-based management tool now, already start working on that. By the time that COP first meets, you could be the one telling them, you have got mail. And with that one, I went 2.5 minutes over, and I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martin, for attempting to the time. You did good. Everyone, I'm now very delighted to introduce our next presenter. While he might not be from the Pacific, he knows that he has many friends here. Khalil Hassan Ali is a senior researcher at the Institute of Marine Affairs in Trinidad and Tobago, with over 10 years' experience in the field of marine policy and governance. He holds a BSc in Environmental Sciences from the University of East Anglia, an MSc in Environment and Development from the University of Reading, and a PhD in Maritime Affairs from the World Maritime University, Sasakawa Global Ocean Institute in Sweden. Additionally, he was a 2013-14 recipient of the UN Nippon Foundation of Japan Fellowship, where he received advanced training in ocean affairs and law of the sea. Khalil was also a 2017-18 Hubert Humphrey Fellowship recipient in the field of natural resources, environmental policy, and climate change. He has served as lead negotiator for the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, on environmental impact assessment in the BBNJ process. And that's only one of the many accomplishments that he has done. So you might wonder, why a CARICOM representative for a Pacific webinar? Well, Khalil will let you know. Khalil, please welcome.
Thanks so much, Takao. And hello, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. Although we're in the month of a month into 2024 already, let me take this opportunity to wish you all the best for 2024. It's really a pleasure to join you in this space as we discuss all things BBNJ. And allow me to really thank the organizers for inviting me to be part of this event, especially since I come from another group of islands on the other side of the world. But PCIDS and the Caribbean community work so closely on the EIA part. I do feel like a honorary Pacific Islander. So thank you, organizers, for inviting me. As we all know, part 4, in this brief presentation, I'll give some thoughts on the outcomes of the EIA part of the BBNJ Agreement. And as we all know, part 4 of the BBNJ Agreement deals with environmental impact assessments. PCIDS and CARICOM were very active participants in negotiations on this part throughout the entire IGC, where we joined forces to create, I would say, a formidable coalition. Our overall vision was to attain greater equity in management of the global commons, including by attaining pluralization of voices in decision-making as it relates to activities proposed to take place in areas beyond national jurisdiction. While we're working together informally in the early stages of the IGC, in the 4th and 5th IGC sessions, the PCIDS and CARICOM we're pleased to formally submit a joint proposal on the entire EIA part. And this joint proposal, among other things, reflected, in our opinion, high ambition and advanced thinking on internationalization of the EIA process. We also sought to reinforce recognition of our groups as thought leaders and important negotiating partners on the part. Of course, during the intersessional period between IGC5 and the resumed IGC5, CARICOM and PCIDS further bolstered support for key elements of its EIA proposal, forming a wider coalition with essential partners, which included the African Group, Costa Rica, Chile, and the Philippines. And the main intention of this like-minded group was to push for and attain an appropriate level of global oversight in the EIA process for proposed activities that occur in or have impacts on areas beyond national jurisdiction. Now, it must be said that the final outcome of the EIA part reflected lower ambition than I think PCIDS and CARICOM would have hoped for. But that said, we were able to lobby for the inclusion of significant and important elements in the text that would go some way in safeguarding the express interests of our groups, including adequately protecting the marine environment of areas beyond national jurisdiction, ensuring that activities permitted to occur in areas beyond national jurisdiction minimize negative impacts on areas falling under the jurisdiction of our states, and indirectly and directly filling existing gaps to conduct and assess the highly technical EIAs under the BBNJ regime. So with that background, I'll now go into some thoughts on more specific points. To build on what is contained in UNCLOS, the BBNJ agreement does manage to achieve a tiering of the EIA process. Although the threshold for determining whether an EIA should be conducted remains the UNCLOS Article 206 standard of the potential to cause substantial pollution or significant and harmful changes to the marine environment, there's now a clear process and more robust criteria outlined to aid in making that determination. And that was an important part of the EIA part of the BBNJ agreement. Any proposed activity that may have more than a minor transitory effect on the marine environment, or the effects are unknown and poorly understood, these activities will have to be screened. And the screening, with its specific requirements, should enable determination of whether there are reasonable grounds for believing that the proposed activity will exceed the UNCLOS 206 threshold for the conduct of an EIA. The BBNJ agreement also has strong provisions on transparency, and particularly as it relates to all reports, including decision-making documents arising out of the EIA process. The clearinghouse mechanism will serve as a repository for all reports and documents. And in addition to this, the agreement is very progressive as it relates to public notification, participation, and consultation throughout the EIA process. We are pleased with the outcomes in these respects, including the fact that there are special requirements for targeted and proactive public notification and consultation when involving SIDS, and also with surrounding states when involving proposed activities that affect high seas pockets. And I think Joan mentioned these two things earlier on in her presentation. The high seas pockets language, along with the adjacency language in the EIA part, were huge wins, and especially for the PCIDS who were fervent champions of these. So that was also a fantastic outcome in the EIA part of the agreement. I think one disappointment for CARICOM and PCIDS was that the BBNJ agreement does not include provisions that enable COP decision-making on the potentially most impactful activities. This idea was advanced by our groups with the reasoning that ABNJ represents the global commons, and therefore it was felt that this justified collective decisions on whether the potentially most impactful activities proceed or not. Now, COP decision-making was a red line for many states in the negotiations, particularly developed ones, and therefore this ambition proved unattainable. However, there are important elements of the EIA part that do allow for global oversight and checks and balances on state decisions under the BBNJ agreement relating to the EIA process. These include, firstly, scientific and technical body consideration and evaluation of draft EIA reports. This role of the STB is important for a number of reasons, but in particular for states with limited capacity to review what will undoubtedly be highly technical documents. An impartial global body with the requisite expertise performing this role of review provide some sense of comfort. A second important check is a polling mechanism open to all state parties, but which also involves the STB for negative screening decisions. And when I say negative screening decisions, I mean a decision taken by a state that no EIA is required for proposed activities. So we have a polling mechanism. If a state decides that no EIA is required, we have a polling mechanism if other states think that this was an incorrect decision taken by the state under whose jurisdiction the activity falls. A third check, again, involves a polling mechanism. And this particular polling is to be used for any negative, unforeseen circumstances and or observed breaches in the conditions under which an activity was given permission to proceed after that activity has commenced. So in the polling mechanisms, concerns can be raised to the party under whose jurisdiction or control the activity falls, and these concerns may be addressed. I must note that another disappointment of CARICOM and PCIDS was that there is no polling mechanism to express and address concerns about decisions to permit activities after an EIA has been conducted, but before those activities actually commence. That little window, we were trying, PCIDS and CARICOM were trying to establish a polling mechanism for that little window, but we were unsuccessful in attaining this. But more positively, as it relates to decision-making, is the existence of a decision-making standard for permitting activities. And it was a significant achievement to get inclusion of text that would see the operationalization of such a standard, whereby a decision to authorize the planned activity under the jurisdiction or control of a party shall only be made when taken into account mitigation or management measures. The party has determined that it has made all reasonable efforts to ensure that an activity can be conducted in a manner consistent with the prevention of significant adverse impacts on the marine environment. So this decision-making standard that has been put into the BBNJ agreement is yet another tool to really rein in the unbridled liberties of state parties to the agreement. And it was really a huge achievement to get this decision-making standard into the agreement. Another point I would like to highlight in this talk is that our groups were seeking language in the BBNJ agreement to develop and enhance a practical and effective liability and compensation mechanism for activities taking place in areas beyond national jurisdiction, especially in the face of what is the wholly state-driven decision-making process on EIAs. However, language to directly enable this was not attained in the final treaty text. Neither was direct reference to the idea of having a liability and compensation fund be developed and established by the COP under the agreement's funding mechanism. In the preamble of the agreement, states are indeed reminded that they may be held liable for damage to the marine environment under international law. And additionally, under the general principles and approaches in Article 7, the polluter pays principle is listed. So these are both useful inclusions in the BBNJ agreement. And in the agreement, there's nothing precluding the BBNJ COP from developing a liability and compensation mechanism really tailor-made to suit the future BBNJ regime. Therefore, this ideal, the ideal of having a liability and compensation mechanism be established under the COP is one that can continue to be pursued by states individually and collectively when they become party to the BBNJ agreement. I'd also like to note that the agreement makes provision for states with capacity constraints in conducting and evaluating screenings and EIAs to really request advice and assistance from assigned experts. With regard to increasing in-country capacity of states to engage in the BBNJ's EIA process, the EIA part includes an objective on building and strengthening the capacity to prepare and evaluate EIAs and strategic environmental assessments, or SEAs. This will be operationalized through Part 5 of the agreement, which we will hear about a bit later. And of course, any capacity building resulting from becoming party to the BBNJ agreement will be applicable to both areas within and beyond national jurisdiction. I think the last point I'd like to make is that the inclusion of SCA in the BBNJ agreement was also another progressive development. In particular, I think that CARICOM and PCIDS, we are very pleased with the ability given to the COP to conduct regional assessments that would synthesize available information about an area, assess current and potential future impacts, and identify gaps and research priorities. Such types of SCAs have the potential to revolutionize the way the ocean is managed by encouraging a more proactive, inclusive, and integrative approach to management. It also facilitates a management approach that could allow for more complete evaluation and mitigation of cumulative impacts, including those from climate change. So we're really pleased to have the inclusion of SCA, and in particular that type of regional assessment, SCA in the BBNJ agreement. I think I'll close my remarks here. I do hope that they've proven interested and will be helpful for your further deliberations. I welcome any questions, and thanks again for giving me the opportunity to present to you today. And I do wish you the best with the rest of the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Khalil. I think this kind of cross-regional thing or cooperation definitely needs to be developed and further progress. Thank you so much for taking the time to come and speak to us, and for all you've done for the EIA section. All right, friends, last but not least, at least for this part, Charles Mitchell. Yeah. Can you Thank you. All right, so Charles Mitchell is counselor of the UN Permanent Mission of Palau to the UN. And unlike all the previous presenters, he had the BBNJ file for about a year. He was given the task to coordinate capacity building and technology transfer for PCIDS in December 2021. At the resumed IGC 5 in February 2023, Palau was chair of the PCIDS, and so Charles, in addition to coordinating CBTT, as we like to call it, also led the group as chair. I'm delighted to invite the representative of the parties to the BBNJ agreement, former PCIDS chair and CBTT coordinator for PCIDS for the final stage of the BBNJ negotiations, Mr. Charles Mitchell. Charles, please.
Well, thank you to Cal for your kind introduction. And at the outset, I would like to thank OPOC for organizing this webinar series. From what my colleagues presented, you might have realized that implementing this agreement will require a significant amount of means of implementation, especially for countries like my own. As you've just heard, Palau has become the first party of this agreement. Despite our current limited resources and as custodians of the ocean, we feel the BBNJ agreement has many provisions that can support Palau to effectively contribute and participate in proposed activities upon entry into force. As my dear colleague Joan has mentioned, while there will be a scientific and technical body to help guide us or guide the implementation of the agreement and support countries like ourselves, for Pacific SIDS, we have always indicated that adequate provisions on capacity building and the transfer of marine technology was paramount. The provisions of capacity building and transfer of marine technology is contained in Part 5 of the agreement and aims to operationalize the relevant provisions of UNCLOS, including Part 14. Next slide, please. So parties have the duty to cooperate to assist other parties, in particular developing state parties, in achieving the objectives of the agreement. This can be achieved directly party to party or through IFBs. Parties also have a duty to collaborate with other stakeholders, such as IPLCs, for instance, as well as other organizations like the crop agencies or philanthropies in implementing the support to developing states. And in doing so, they shall give full recognition to the special requirements of developing states, in particular SIDS, The fact that we have paragraph M of Article 7, which was mentioned earlier, which recognizes the special circumstances of SIDS as a guiding principle or approach, is critical for this part because it recognizes the unique challenges SIDS face in the ocean space. SIDS are indeed recognized as a special recipient in Articles 42, para 1 and 4, Article 43, para 3 and 5, and Article 45, paras 2A and 2E, if you're interested. Next slide, please. So I'm sure Joan and Rose are probably laughing right now because this is another rendition of a flow chart of how to understand how the various committees intertwine with each other. So on the question on who are the providers, this would be any party within their capacity. This means that both developed and developing state parties must provide, also taking note that SIDS might not have such capacity to do so. Likewise, to the discussions on MGRs as well as financing, the Pacific SIDS felt there was a need to have both voluntary and mandatory provisions within this part. We believe that if there were only voluntary provisions, it would not change the status quo and would not be adequate enough to reduce the current inequities in the ocean space. These were difficult discussions, but I feel we reached a very good compromise. The agreement says that parties shall ensure capacity building and shall cooperate to achieve the transfer of marine technology. And by doing so, they take into account our special circumstances as SIDS. Parties shall also provide resources to support capacity building and develop and transfer of marine technology, as well as facilitate access to other sources of support. It's also a good sign that some are yet to ratify, but are already implementing this part, including through the Coordinated Regional Program. There are also specific provisions on the transfer of marine technology. The agreement, for instance, provides that it shall take place on fair and most favorable terms, including on concessional and preferential terms, in accordance with mutually agreed terms and conditions, as well as the objectives of the agreement. What this means is obsolete technology or technology not adapted to a certain context should not be transferred to recipients. It will need to be technology that is useful and that does not lead to some undue burden on recipients. The addition of mutually agreed terms and conditions, however, takes into account considerations for intellectual property rights. Excuse me. The agreement also provides for supporting the development of technology. That means that in our own countries, we could very well, through the BBNJ agreement, see programs to support our people, develop our capacity, and to develop technology within our countries, as well as within the region. Such technology could be inspired through our traditional knowledge and engineering, but here too, such traditional knowledge of IPLCs is protected through the requirement of free, prior, and informed consent. Another useful provision is in Part 7, and essentially it provides that special fund that Joan had mentioned. I believe Rose also mentioned as well. The special fund and the Jeff Trust Fund are to fund capacity building projects so that it could fill any gaps in the provision of capacity building and the transfer of marine technology. CBTMT is what I like to call it, can be accessed or provided through benefit sharing arising from activities with respect to MGRs and DSI of MGRs of ABNJ. To be effective, any program to be effective, any programs on capacity or technology must be adequate to the recipient, and indeed CBTMT could be or should be country driven as recognized in the agreement. To do that, the agreement provides for needs assessments to inform such support. This is something that the Pacific SIDS introduced, and the proposal rapidly gained traction during the negotiations. So with needs assessments, needs assessments can be on an individual case by case or on a sub-regional or regional basis. The agreement also highlights that when providing capacity building and transfer marine technology, it should build up and not duplicate existing programs and should be guided by lessons learned. I understand that there have already been informal discussions on this matter in the Pacific region, And as a representative of a party of the party to the agreement, I think it's critical that the region does not wait and be proactive in developing together with partners such methodologies. There are different needs that we're talking about, the needs to become a signatory leading to ratification, as well as related to the implementation of the agreement. Both are crucial. Next slide, please. So requiring parties to provide the necessary support is one thing, suggesting that there should be a needs assessment is another. The question is, how do we go about assessing and matching those needs with the relevant resources? Initially, we thought that there needed to be some sort of mechanism or committee to operationalize the provisions of capacity building in the transfer marine technology. Other delegations shared similar views, namely CARICOM and CLAM. And so the idea of a mechanism or a committee quickly progressed. The agreement established a CBTMT committee in which the terms of reference will be adopted at the first COP. We were also successful in securing a dedicated SID seat on that committee. When we start discussing preparations for implementation, this is something we should be very mindful of. Part 5 and related provisions can help ensure SIDs who choose to become parties to the agreement are equipped to be a contributing party to the agreement. The CBTMT committee is also important because it makes the linkages with other committees of the instrument, including the Access Benefit Sharing Committee, the Financial Mechanism, and the Scientific and Technical Body. It also establishes linkages with the organizations in the region. And so as we are with the BBNJ agreement and the rationale of improving coordination, it would be extremely important that the regional architecture in the Pacific ensures that there is an entry point that then can disseminate all relevant information and programs to the rest. Finally, before I give the floor back, you saw there that there are many provisions in the agreement that enable us to receive support to effectively implement the agreement and achieve what it entails. And kind of going back on what Charlotte mentioned, however, as a party to the agreement, we are aware we should not aim just for the entry into force of the agreement. We should aim for universal participation, and we need all parties to ensure that adequate means of implementation are provided. With that, I thank you.
Ms. Oolong, Charles, thank you so much for your presentation. I think this part 1, which is now concluded, provided a lot of information, and we can really see how complex the implementation of the treaty is going to be. Yes, so now we are lucky to have the Pacific Ocean Commissioner with us. He managed to get his technology transferred and has resolved the issue, and so he will like to provide some, I guess, part 2 welcoming remarks or some hellos to all of you. Commissioner, if you could.
Thank you, Tekao. Can you hear me? Just to... Yes, sorry, the technology transfer did not extend to the camera this morning, so I'll have to do without the camera this morning. But thank you for giving me the opportunity, Tekao, and I think perhaps this is a good part to intervene and to say some words, share some words with the participants at this very important event. So Ali, and good morning, Istanbul, Yakwe to all of you, whether you are zooming in the evening, in the afternoon, in the morning, and from all the time zones that all of you are zooming in from. I want to express my sincere gratitude to each and every one of you for joining us today in such large numbers and from diverse backgrounds. It is an honor to extend a warm welcome to senior government officials from the various line ministries, colleagues and friends from civil society, academia, the private sector, and collaborating partners. This overwhelming interest in the new agreement for the conservation and sustainable use of marine biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction is truly heartening. I wanted also to perhaps take this moment to congratulate the government, the parliament, and the people of Palau for the very courageous step in becoming the first party to the BBNJ agreement. Palau, of course, soon to be the home of OPOC, was undeniably one of the pioneers that initiated the BBNJ process back in the early 2000s. We must also recognize Palau's neighbor, the Federated States of Micronesia, who was the first to sign off on the agreement in September last year. And of course, now we have the privilege to welcome the Kingdom of Tonga, recently joined other Pacific Island countries as signatories to the agreement. So you see, it is obvious that the commitment, our commitment as a region to the ambitions and the objectives of the BBNJ agreement is unwavering. And as such, we are dedicated to turning these ambitions into reality and success. Secondly, I am very privileged to know that we have with us today experts that had contributed significantly to the process and offering crucial support to Pacific negotiators. Their hard work ensured that regional priorities are duly reflected in the agreement. For the BBNJ negotiations process was no doubt a lengthy process. Many of here today would no doubt recall the countless hours of negotiations, both inside the formal negotiations room, as well as in the informal sessions in the corridors, in the coffee shops, and on many occasions on days spanning over a period more than 24 hours, sustained only by coffee and snacks on many occasions. Personal sacrifices is what I wanted to say by negotiators, not only from the Pacific, but all of you who made an effort to bring about this groundbreaking and historic agreement. This agreement is often hailed as the most important law of the sea agreement of this century. And it is true, this is historic. And we owe many of its provisions to our Pacific negotiators. For the first time in our history, we now have the legal framework to close the gap. And as Martin said earlier, meaningfully enforcing conservation, management, and sustainable use of biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction. Extending the arm of meaningful enforcement, meaningful management into areas beyond national jurisdiction, in addition to the work that we do within our own exclusive economic zones. While grateful, we recognize that this is just a step forward. As custodians of the ocean, we must not falter at this stage. Rather, we must make this agreement a reality and a success. We have a unique opportunity, really, with the implementation or the impending implementation of the agreement to make a change. For the work we are doing in the region, just a word of caution, though, that with countries in the region work toward ratification and preparations toward eventual implementation of the agreement, there is no question that we in the region have received and are receiving support from numerous partners from within and beyond the region. There is no question that we embrace these partnerships wholeheartedly. However, I think it is important to point out that we must be strategic in our approach in this regard to avoid overwhelming the small administrations in the region with numerous meetings, trainings, and workshops, and duplications, etc. Rather, we must work collaboratively to avoid a challenge to our small countries in the region. So in line with this approach, as you might have known, the Pacific Island Forum leaders have mandated that the OPOC coordinate the support of the Pacific Island countries as they work toward ratification and preparations for eventual implementation of the agreement. That there must be a coordinated approach in delivering support to our countries, similar to the work that the OPOC had led during the actual negotiations of the agreement. This program is set to be designed and implemented with partners possessing complementary expertise, many of whom you have already met today, and some you will meet in the later sessions today. So in this connection, I perhaps could say unapologetically, make this plea to partners interested in supporting the process to take this into account. With that, can I now extend many thanks to all of you and wish all of you a productive webinar. I certainly stand by to see the outcomes of the webinar, the discussions that will transpire in the next hour, and will carry on the work following this inaugural webinar. So Tekau, thank you for your steering the sessions this morning. And I will stand by on the sideline to see whether you would need me again in the process. But thank you for the opportunity to speak to the very impressive participants this morning. Pinaka Komoltada.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Mute yourself, Commissioner, please. Thank you so much. So ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to go into part 2 of this webinar. We will try to finish so that we can have some questions. If not, as I mentioned, we will definitely take the questions into consideration and try to address them in future activities. So now I will call on Penny Souvei-Nakama, the Oceans Analyst and Manager of the Office of the Pacific Ocean Commissioner, to give us an overview of what the Commissioner mentioned about the coordinated program mandated by leaders. Penny, if you would please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tekau. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Firstly, to begin by thanking all the members that have presented earlier for the tireless efforts throughout the process. And of course, we have heard an overview of the instrument. My honest task this morning is to present on what the Pacific region is doing to support, in particular, our Pacific SIDS members in the ratification, domestication, and implementation of the BBNJ instrument. So I'll head right into, we've heard the overview, but I'll talk a bit about what the leaders, forum leaders have mandated in as far as the work on the BBNJ instrument is concerned. So we like to tell the story that it has been a journey. The leaders have not just been following from afar, but I think they have been following the process quite closely. And if you note from Charlotte's presentation, when the BBNJ process has started, but also, I mean, the leaders have themselves followed the process throughout. And you will note here, there's some coincidence here, with Palau being the first ratified. There was a leaders' decision in 2014, where the leaders supported a decision in favor of launching negotiations by September 2015. So after 2014, in 2016, in Federated States of Micronesia, leaders supported the convening of a time intergovernmental conference no later than the 71st third session of the UNGA. Also in Samoa, Apia in 2017, leaders called for commencement of negotiations and also called for the strengthening of coordination. 2018, leaders agreed to mobilize all relevant forum mechanisms. So calling on the regional organizations to come together and mobilize support to our members in terms of advocating for our regional positions in the negotiations. In 2022, I missed out mentioning 2022, where leaders adopted the 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific. Under the strategy, under the thematic area on ocean, leaders have also talked about the important work on the BBNJ instrument. In Nandi in 2023, that was around February, there was, and I noted during this time, there was also the IGC negotiations in New York. So leaders have sort of made the decision to call on the conclusion, expeditious conclusion of the negotiation. So during that time, we also noted that the leaders' decision sort of gave some empowerment and gave some motivation to the experts or the negotiators to conclude the negotiations. And then you have by November in Cook Islands in 2023, by November, the negotiations had concluded in June. So in the communique, the leaders acknowledged the conclusion of the negotiations. They encouraged members to sign on and also endorsed the approach on the implementation phase. Next slide, please. I'll just talk a bit more on the 2023 decision in Cook Islands by leaders. There's sort of like 4 broad pillars on what had formed in terms of the coordinated approach, the paper that was discussed through the Forum Officials Committee. First, and that's captured in paragraph 58 of the communique. First, it talked about thematic webinars, talking on raising awareness amongst government stakeholders. If there were particular thematic areas that government officials had interest in understanding more, this was sort of like the webinars that we will be able to unveil all those thematic areas. And also, of course, to ensure that the webinars were public so that the public at large were able to attend. And I'm very thankful to Tekau for leading us on this first webinar. And then I'll move on to the second one, which is regional workshops. The second pillar is, of course, convening regional workshops. The third is national support. But of course, the regional workshops is where different countries come together and they have the ability to focus on what sort of assistance that we would like to collectively pursue as a region, what are sort of the implementation needs, the ratification steps. So the regional workshops will enable not only for all of us for our countries to come together and identify their needs, but also to share their lessons and experiences. The next slide. So what would be I think the final pillar is, of course, the regional architecture. As I mentioned in 2022, the 2050 strategy, it talks also about the review of the regional architecture, how the regional architecture is positioned to help members deliver on the 2050 strategy commitments. One of the commitments is, of course, BBNJ. In terms of regional support, okay, thanks, Tekau. I've missed a few slides here. So the regional workshops, we provided the sort of support that's required. The objectives is to provide adequate information and support materials, and of course, provide information and steps for domestication. And of course, also establish a community of peers. Next slide, please. Regional workshop. Of course, we are still working. So as I mentioned earlier, the regional workshops is one of the pillars in addition to the webinars and national support. We are trying to finalize the dates for the regional. We will have one regional workshop this year. So we're hoping that we will bring quite a number of you on board to attend and also encourage national stakeholders to attend in terms of, we know that the prerequisite for some national governments is to prepare submissions through their national parliaments and national legislature bodies. So we certainly would encourage the regional. We will get back to you on the details, trying to hammer down the details. We are liaising with the various stakeholders. And then, so the national support, I wanted to mention specifically, based on based on requests from members, we are also trying to have the ability to respond to countries who desire to have their national support. Ideally, the national support or national consultations would follow the regional consultations. But I must say also, I mean, you'll be hearing from our partners after this presentation, but this is one of the gap areas that we're finding, the support from partners. We're noticing there's a lot of support at the regional level for regional workshops. So support that encompasses all of us as a region. But the national support is sort of like an area that we are trying to encourage partners to get into because it is such a critical step, national support for national consultation. It provides the basis for how countries will move forward in terms of ratification. So it is also equally important. We know that Charles had mentioned earlier about a window or entry point where we can start to disseminate information. So the OPOC website, given the mandate that's provided by leaders, we try to create a space and hoping to work with governments and also hear from you what are sort of the additional means that we can provide, enable, so that we can continue to share information, share the presentations that have been shared today that can be used. So my next slide is on implementation. So to summarize, our plan is currently focused on supporting countries to be part of the efforts to push for entry into force so that our countries can be at the table at COP1. Learning from the UNCLOS, when UNCLOS entered into force in 1994, there was regional workshops in 1998 and 1999, 1998 in Samoa, 1999 in Vavau, Tonga. So there's a lot of learning points, and I'm very grateful that the coordination support that we are suggesting that leaders have endorsed is also taking into account the learning points from the negotiations process and how we as a collective region support our members and of course with partners on board. I guess, colleagues, that is the end of my presentation, and I now have the pleasure of inviting our partners to provide their presentation. And of course, maybe Tekau will move us through this, and I acknowledge that we will probably begin with the Government of Australia to present for us. Over to you, Tekau. Thank you very much.
Great, you said it all. So we're meeting our partners, the partners of implementation now, and indeed, the next presenter is Ryan Kifley from Australia. Mary, if you could show his presentation, please. And Ryan, if you could come to the floor.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. And thank you to everyone. Good morning, and again, yes, thank you very much to OPOC for giving me the opportunity here to present today and outline some very short points from Australia's perspective. As you introduced, thank you. My name is Ryan Keatley. I was the lead negotiator on the Australian delegation for the Area-Based Management Tools chapter, and I'm now working with my team towards Australia's ratification and implementation of the treaty, including awareness raising and activities to support the ratification and implementation in the region where appropriate. A very big thank you to all the presenters today. They've been incredibly informative and very useful in my understanding, and I'm sure in everyone's understanding, and it's great to see so many familiar faces. I'd also like to extend thanks to the Pacific Ocean Commissioner for his words, which really emphasised the importance of this historic agreement for the region and of course the world's ocean. Move to the next slide, thank you. So as a member of the Pacific Islands Forum, Australia was really pleased to see the prominence of this treaty in their leaders' communique issued in November last year. We support the endorsement and greatly appreciate OPOC's role in providing a coordinated regional support, including through this webinar. We see this treaty as presenting a great opportunity for the Pacific region to continue leading the way on ocean conservation and sustainable use. With this application to the high seas, the treaty is a crucial piece of the puzzle, and it helps us achieve sustainable ocean management across the ocean. Given our stewardship, of the Blue Pacific continent, it's vital that the Pacific region is well represented when this important ocean treaty enters into force, and we're pleased that the Pacific continues to demonstrate leadership on this front. We really commend, like others have, Palau for becoming the first country to officially ratify the treaty. It's a really positive that also 13 PIF members, including Palau, have signed the treaty, and Australia is very proud and pleased to be among this number. We want to work with partners in the region to raise awareness of the treaty and opportunities that it presents. And today's webinar has been a really important first step on this front. We'd also really like to work together through our respective ratification processes. We do understand that countries will need to undertake their own national approval processes, and indeed Australia is continuing to work through our domestic ratification steps to ensure Australia can ratify as quickly as possible. At the same time, we would like to look ahead, and we'd like to on how we can work together in the region on the implementation of this treaty. There were a number of shared priorities that we were pleased to work together on with PCIDS through the treaty negotiations. And it's very good to see Martin's face, who I got to see regularly throughout negotiations. But we'd like to continue that, and particularly on those important issues that Joan mentioned earlier as well, such as the rights and interests of Indigenous peoples and local communities, traditional knowledge of Indigenous peoples and local communities, transparency and meaningful consultation with traditional knowledge holders and adjacent states, and the special circumstances of SIDS and the need for that targeted capacity building support. We want to continue to work together in this region as part of the OPOC coordinated approach to ensure that these priorities are implemented effectively once the treaty enters into force. As a demonstration of our commitment to the treaty, Australia committed funds through OPOC over the next 3 years to raise awareness of the treaty in the region and work together on ratification and plans for implementation. On that, the treaty also provides a significant opportunity to work together to protect marine biodiversity. In particular, the Marine Protected Area Framework will play an incredibly important role in helping us contribute to the global target to protect 30% of the world's coastal marine areas by 2030 as part of the Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework that was agreed in December 2022. We want to keep this in mind as a significant opportunity on the horizon for the Pacific region to continue to work collaboratively and demonstrate global leadership on ocean management. I'll try to keep it very short. I know we're over time, so I'll leave it there, and thank you, and happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Ryan, for your presentation and the support that you're providing through your government. Now we will turn to the regional organizations. We have a few who are not represented today, but are actively engaged in supporting us. So unfortunately, we will not be hearing from them today. And this is FFA, the Fisheries Forum Agency, and the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat, unfortunately. But we're very delighted to have SPC represented by Janice Mose, who was a former PCIDS BBNJ EIA, so Environmental Impact Assessment Coordinator for the Solomon Islands. And she's now the Ocean Advocacy and Strategic Engagement Advisor at SPC. Janice, we're delighted to have you.
Thank you, Tekao. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes.
All right, so thank you, Tekao, and hello to everyone joining this webinar today. Thank you to the Office of the Pacific Commissioner for organizing this webinar and for giving SPC an opportunity to speak. And given that we have a 2-minute time limit, I'll dive straight into it. So taking a step back, SPC has provided support to PCIDS member countries at various BBNJ meetings over the years. In particular, we have been supporting countries with various elements of the treaty, including marine genetic resources, capacity building and tech transfer, and traditional knowledge as a cross-cutting issue. SPC will continue to support countries based on their needs as much as we can. So in terms of the next steps, SPC is here to lend support where it speaks to our strengths. So we have experience working with countries in domesticating international law in the maritime space, as well as the fisheries space. We have experience in creating pathways to treaties, partnering with member countries, and developing tools to assist them to progress this. We have worked with countries in the implementation of UNCLOS in terms of establishing and operationalizing maritime boundaries and zones, and we have done this working with UN DOALAS and the UN Treaty Section. SPC understands that countries are at different stages with different priorities when it comes to ocean-related legislation and policy. And we have a deep understanding of those issues, particularly with maritime boundaries and integrated ocean management. So post-ratification, our strength will be in supporting technical compliance and matching our capabilities and regional capacity building with treaty obligations. Technical legal compliance with the treaty obligations is important, for example, oceans management policy, and this will influence how our member countries opt to go about domesticating and implementing the BBNJ in light of the existing ocean policy and ocean management frameworks. The work that we currently do now at SPC, particularly around integrated ocean management and national ocean policy implementation, can help to set the scene and aid in the BBNJ implementation. For instance, we are already active in a number of thematic areas and can front load some of our efforts now to take into account what we need to do post-ratification. For example, in terms of capacity building, we currently have in place an early career ocean professional program under our Pacific Center for Ocean Science. And this provides for member country governments to have early career ocean professionals stationed within government ministries to aid in the implementation of their national ocean policy and also other ocean-related support that countries need. My final point would be that is here to support countries working alongside COP agencies and other partners, and we could do it through existing programs and projects we're fitting and seek the additional resources to provide meaningful assistance to our members. We can organize ourselves if tasked by countries so that there is clarity around the needs of our members. I'll stop here for now. I thank you, and I'm happy to take questions after, and I give back the floor to Cal. Thanks.
Wonderful, Janice. Thank you so much. Now I have the pleasure to invite Puta Tofinga, Environmental Assessment and Planning Officer for SPREP, to give a few words on what SPREP can do to support the implementation of the BBNJ agreement. We cannot hear you, Puta.
Sorry, thank you, Tekau, and thanks to OPOC for organizing this. And greetings, Talo Farawa, I'm very Lowly. I will begin with introducing SPREP strategic plan and priorities and mandates, and link them with the BBNJ ratification support. So for your information, SPREP work is guided by its strategy plan 2017 to 2026, endorsed by member countries. Our main focus areas of support for BBNJ will be on EIA under our EMG program, Environmental and Monitoring Governance Program, and APMT, including NPA, under our IOE program. Sorry about that, chicken liver. So, in terms of relationship with the BBNJ agreement and that legal instruments, we have the Nobel Convention, and we have Article 16, which deals specifically with the EIA, and also we have Article 14, deals specifically with the protected areas and the protection of flora and fauna. So, in terms of support, how can SPREP support EIA provisions? From our base preliminary assessment of the EIA BBNJ provisions, party countries will bear most of the responsibilities in applying the EIA process for planning activities in BBNJ. And also, please note that the capacity and ability of the PICs to implement the BBNJ EIA provision will mostly depend on how robust the existing national AI governance and processes are. So in terms of our SPREP supports under its current mandate and program, we will continue to support and work together with Pacific Island countries to strengthen their capacities in the implementation of the environmental and social safeguards, including the use of EIA and strategic environmental assessment in line with the BBNJ EIA processes. In addition, as already mentioned by the previous speakers, there will be supports be provided to party countries under these agreements, and the support in terms of capacity building and the transfer of knowledge. And it is important that SPREP assist to access to the aforementioned support. So we will try our best to support member countries to access these supports. In terms of area-based management tools and MPAs, also SPREP under its current thematic program on island and ocean ecosystem, the following are the main areas of focus for support related to BBNJ agreements as listed down. Also, we came up with some recommendations to help the delivery of the support to member countries, such as the need for a comprehensive management framework when establishing MPAs and to fast-track access to resources. In terms of, just to sum up, and in terms of general implementation support, SPREP to work and collaborate with existing partners, members, and BBNJ Interim Secretary to facilitate the expedited access to the needed supports. SPREP will also build on its coordination and implementing roles to work with government and key stakeholders in terms of leveraging additional resources to genuine and durable partnership, and to provide SPREP members with technical assistance from the Secretary staff and the international expertise through partnership with countries and organizations beyond the SPREP membership. And that's all, and thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Puta, for your presentation, for highlighting some of the areas where SPREP can provide support. I'm now very delighted to invite Dr. Anish Singh from the University of the South Pacific to provide a few words about what USP can do. I know it's a lot. If you could share the slide, perfect. Thank you.
Can you hear me? All right. Thank you, Tekal, for giving USP the opportunity to share some thoughts on how it could support the ratification of the BBNJ agreement. Next slide, please. So how can USP contribute? So university has a set of very valuable skills and expertise to assist the Pacific Island countries in the ratification of the BBNJ agreement. The university is made up of 12 Pacific Island countries. On the map, you can see all the countries in the region with the exclusive economic zones marked. And so most of the research that is being done is in these areas. But as a whole, we are looking at the Southwest Pacific region, which is the regional focus. And this is where our diverse expertise lies in. So we can play a pivotal role in supporting these countries in navigating the complexities of the BBNJ agreement, and most of these which were highlighted in the several talks that were there. So collaborative efforts between USP and the regional stakeholders, the agencies that are participants to this agreement, we can contribute to the sustainable marine diversity, biodiversity management, and conservation in areas beyond national jurisdiction. And drawing on the prior experience and research connected, the following slide shows some of the areas of engagement where USP can contribute to the ratification of the BBNJ agreement. This list is not exhaustive, so again, emphasizing that we have experience in this, we've done this, and we will continue to do this. And these can be contributing points or subject areas that we can work on. So one is on climate change, adaptation, and resilience, reading from the left to the right. Marine biology and ecology, community engagement and social sciences, international collaboration, oceanography and remote sensing, especially for the high seas, environmental impact assessment, technology and innovation, legal and policy studies, capacity building and training, and communication and advocacy. So this list is not exhaustive. We may be able to contribute to more subject areas that can help for the ratification of the BBNJ agreement. That's my 2 minutes. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anish. So these were some of the crop agencies who are working in this coordinated program. Next presenters are from I would like to invite Kim Edu from the EU, who might be joined by Gael Sanchez-Cano of the Spanish Embassy of Fiji. Kim, if you would, please.
Yes, thank you, Tekao, and thank you, OPOC, for organizing this webinar. On behalf of the European Union, just very briefly, wanted to focus on the fact that the European Union has signed the BBNJ Treaty on behalf of its 27 member states, and we share many of the ambition and priorities with the Pacific in trying to get the treaty implemented. This support is also goes through OPOC. I mean, the EU supports the mandate that was given to OPOC by the Pacific Island leaders. And so we will work with OPOC and all their partners in trying to move forward in implementation and ratification. Our support specifically in the region, I am based here at the delegation in Fiji. And our support goes through a number of programs. At the global level, there's a global ocean program, which will provide technical assistance for national administrations who might seek technical expertise. And we also have a number of regional programs that are ongoing and that will be implemented in the coming years. So I'm happy if anyone has any questions to provide more information on that. With the support to OPOC, we are collaborating also with our partner here in Fiji, with the Spanish government, with my colleague Gael. So I'll just pass the floor to him.
Thank you very much, Kim. Thank you very much, Tekao and the OPOC for organizing this event and for giving me the opportunity to speak. Thank you to the experts and partners that have already spoken, and Isambula Vinaka from SUVA and Vinaka for this opportunity. My name, as Kim said, is Gael Sanchez-Cano. I am the Chargé d'Affaires of the Embassy of Spain here in Fiji. And very briefly, let me say a few words on behalf of Spain, which is actually very happy and very honored to take part in the Team Europe initiative, which is meaning joining forces between the European Union and its member states to help the OPOC in the processes of ratification, domestication, and implementation of the BBNJ treaty in the Pacific. Spain is especially committed to ocean governance and ocean protection, and has always advocated for an especially ambitious BBNJ treaty during the negotiation process. And this is also why Spain has been a continuous supporter of the Office of the Pacific Ocean Commission ever since its creation. And in 2023, so last year, the government of Spain decided to increase Spain's voluntary annual contribution to the OPOC by 50%. And this was, of course, taking into account the specific needs of the OPOC in the context of the then newly signed BBNJ treaty. And in the framework of the cooperation between the European Union and the OPOC, and in this Team Europe approach, Spain has agreed that the OPOC can utilize the funds from Spain's contribution to cover the needs of OPOC in fulfilling their mission regarding BBNJ in the Pacific, and more specifically recruiting an advisor for the tasks of ratification, domestication, and implementation. And from here, well, Spain, together with the EU, will follow the developments and always be ready to join its efforts to the OPOC and to the rest of partners. And well, just before I finish, let me just congratulate Palau, a country that has very tight historical ties with Spain, for breaking the path for the rest of us as the first party to the BBNJ Treaty, and also for being the next host of the OPOC, hopefully very soon. So this being said, congratulations on the work accomplished and best of luck for what there remains to be done. And thank you very much. That's it.
Thank you very much, Kim and Gael, for the few words. Trust me, Kim and Gael, I'm really, really looking forward.
Sorry, Tekao, I think there is a problem. At least I cannot hear you. Or
As you mentioned, has a lot of programs planned. So Charlotte, if you would.
Thank you, Tekao. So very briefly, being conscious of time, DOALOS has developed a program of activities which includes the development of tools for capacity needs assessments. We will undertake regional workshops, including at least one for the Pacific, and those will be preceded by needs assessment. Besides the regional level, we will also provide technical assistance at the national level for states that will approach us to that end. We are going to continue doing a series of online briefings on the agreement. They're accessible to all, as well as hold a number of side events on the margins of various international meetings. And we were very pleased to partner with OPOC and AOSIS last week to organize a side event on the margins of the SIDS conference prep meeting in New York. And we will also develop a number of capacity building outreach tools and materials, including a number of fact sheets on the agreement. I also want to mention that DOALOS, in addition to the BBNJ specific activities, also has a number of other activities I think that could be helpful, including an ocean governance capacity building program funded by Norway, as well as the UN Nippon Foundation Fellowship, one of which will be launched in later this year and will be specifically targeted to SIDS. So we invite interested candidates to apply, and otherwise please do not hesitate to reach out if you need any further information on any of the DOALOS activities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. Next presenter is from Anchors University, Christine Dallagher, who also followed very closely the negotiations of BBNJ and actually did her PhD on BBNJ. Christine, please.
Thank you. No, very, very kind, Tekao. So really nice to be here and a pleasure to talk to you all. My name is Christine Dallagher, and I'm a lecturer at Anchors, the Australian National Centre for Ocean Resources and Security at the University of Wollongong in Australia. And on behalf of Anchors and my colleague, Dr. Sarah Lothian, who is also online and participating in this webinar, we want to thank OPOC for the opportunity to support this very important initiative. Sarah and I strongly believe in the mandate that OPOC has been given to coordinate efforts to implement the BBNJ agreement across the Pacific region, and we believe that we can contribute to this important work in 3 different ways. First, Sarah and I bring to this initiative years of experience with the BBNJ process since the very early days of the PrepCon. We've both been writing, teaching, and working in the BBNJ space for several years. And we believe that our combined expertise can be tailored to support the Pacific region for the implementation of the BBNJ agreement, not only for the upcoming regional workshop that Penny spoke about, but for other national and regional initiatives on an ongoing basis. Second, our institution stands with us in supporting this initiative. As many of you are aware, NCORS is a longstanding partner of OPOC and Pacific states and is committed to providing national and both national and regional support. Third, Sarah and I, together with NCORS, are coming to this process as neighbors. Our geographic proximity brings with it knowledge, commitment, and understanding. And Sarah and I fully recognize that we and our Pacific neighbors are in the same canoe, to borrow from that frequently used analogy at the negotiations, and that we all need to be paddling in the same direction if the ambition of the BBNJ agreement is to be fully realized. Sarah and I, again, we reiterate our long-term commitment as partners to support the Pacific region in getting ready for the robust implementation of the BBNJ agreement, and we look forward to working with all of you to make that happen. So please do not hesitate to reach out to us at NCORS or through the up-and-coming OPOC webpage if we can be of any assistance. Thanks so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Christine. And yes, we hope that the webpage will be operational very soon. Thank you. And so now I have the pleasure to invite Veronica Frank, who was also very involved in the negotiations in another hat, who will present on behalf of Bloomberg Philanthropies. Veronica, please.
Yeah, thank you, Takao, and thank you, OPOC, for organizing this webinar, for inviting us to present. So just maybe a few words about Bloomberg Ocean Fund, which is the regranting arm of Bloomberg Philanthropies Ocean Initiative, housed under the Oceans 5 Funder Collective. We work on advancing policy outcomes towards a diverse, inclusive, and equitable 30 by 30, but also on ocean coral conservation and fishing transparency. We also manage a new Bloomberg Arcadia funding initiative focused on 30 by 30. And High Seas is the latest addition to our portfolio and a priority for the Bloomberg Ocean Initiative. We know we cannot achieve 30 by 30 without the High Seas. So accelerating ratification and entry into force of BBNJ by 2025 and fast-tracking the first generation of High Seas MPAs is going to be critical, and they're key objectives for us. Likewise, supporting the continuous leadership of developing nations, especially the Pacific Islands, in driving ratification and implementation of the treaty is a priority for Bloomberg Ocean Initiative, as PCIDs have consistently been the drivers of international environmental progress and equity, including in BBNJ, also as shown as by the government of Palau being the first one to ratify the treaty, and which we really deeply congratulate. So to this end, in March 2023, Bloomberg Philanthropies announced a pledge from 9 philanthropies for a combined 5 million, which has since doubled to 10 million, to support developing nations with capacity building assistance to quickly ratify the treaty and effectively participate in its implementation. And since then, we have curated a package of projects to accelerate ratification in different regions, including in the Pacific, working with the UCN, Pacific Regional Offices in Suva, and across small island developing states, working with Oceans Voices and the University of Wollongong. So both projects coordinate closely with OPOC to complement and support regional ratification efforts, as being responsive to the needs of the region is a key priority for us. And here we want to acknowledge the OPOC inspiring leadership in coordinating and driving ratification in the Pacific. So moving forward, the Bloomberg Ocean Fund intends to remain a committed partner for OPOC and for the Pacific region at every stage of the BBNJ process, from signature and ratification to its implementation, including development and establishment of High Seas MPAs, and to provide our platforms to celebrate, amplify, and profile the Pacific leadership as champion of the High Seas. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Veronica. And now I'm very pleased to invite another person who was actively involved in the negotiation and was actually negotiators for PCIDS on, again, the environmental impact assessment file, and actually worked with Khalil. She's now the High Seas Alliance coordinator for the Pacific, and it's a pure delight to invite Olive Vai to share a few words. And I think we have your presentation. Yes.
Thank you, Takao, for those kind words, and thank you for the opportunity to share this virtual space with the online participants, as well as the esteemed panel of speakers. As Takao said, I am speaking on behalf of the High Seas Alliance. I'm also joined online by our director, Rebecca Hubbard. So I'll be providing a brief background on the High Seas, our initiatives in the region, and why our work matters. So the High Seas Alliance was founded in 2011. It is a coalition of 50 plus non-governmental members and the International Union for Conservation of Nature that has been working towards protecting the 50% of the planet that is high seas, the global ocean beyond national jurisdiction. So for, oh, sorry, next slide, please. Oh.
Sorry, that may not be the right one.
No problem, Mire.
I suggest that if
yeah.
Oh, okay.
I can, yes, yep, there we have it. Thank you, Mere. So for the High Seas Alliance initiatives in the Pacific, we are focused on supporting countries to ratify capacity building, as well as building public and political momentum. So for instance, in support of countries to ratify with capacity building, Anchors, OPOC, Ocean Voices, and many others are funded and interested in running workshops and events, which the High Seas Alliance will actively support and contribute our technical and policy advice and expertise. We'll also provide support to countries for institutional setup and operationalization of the provisions of the treaty. So for building public and political momentum, we're looking at high-level engagement by the leaders at key regional and international events to raise awareness of the importance of swift ratification and entry into force of the BBNJ Treaty. We're also looking at multi-stakeholder engagement. This is through webinars, workshops, also side events at these international and regional meetings for knowledge sharing as well as network and exploring actionable options. So why the High Seas work matters. So the opportunity now is to translate the treaty into action, as the further we delay the adoption, ratification, and implementation of this treaty, the worse it will be for the state of our oceans. So each and every country has the same obligation to future generations to urgently reverse the ocean decline. So, sorry, next slide, please, Mede. So to conclude, the High Seas Alliance is available and willing to support the large ocean states of the Pacific region on their path to ratification and in preparation for implementation of the BBNJ Treaty. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Olivier. Big ocean states, not large ocean states. Just kidding. I have the pleasure now to invite Francis Disiga from IUCN Pacific, who will also provide some elements on what IUCN has in store. Francis? You're muted. Sorry. Thank you.
My apologies. Thank you again, Tekao, and thank you for this webinar. It was really interesting and very informative. Just a quick one from IUCN, just looking at the time. IUCN will be working alongside 5 countries that we have identified in terms of ratification and implementation of the BBNJ Treaty. Keeping in line with the last Leaders Forum's plan to promote awareness and regional workshops and also national priorities support. We will be supporting these countries through their ratification and implementation of the BBNJ Treaty, through workshops and also webinars. We'll also be supporting OPOC, so that we do not have any duplication in terms of the project for the BBNJ. And so far we have reached out to the 5 countries that we're working on. So the 5 countries that we have identified is Palau, Vanuatu, Fiji, Tonga, and Samoa. These are the countries that we will be supporting in terms of ratification and implementation. We'll be supporting and assisting them in regards to any workshops or regional workshops that will be done by these respective countries so that we do not have any duplication in terms of providing awareness and our support. Yeah, that's if any questions, you can always reach out to either me or Maria, who is the head of environmental law here at IUCN. Apologies from her end, as she's currently on leave. Yeah, so we'll be leading the work here at IUCN Oceania Regional Office. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francis, and we hope that as you support these 5 countries, other partners in this program can also support you in supporting these countries. We're almost there, promise. So the next presenter is Bianca Haas, who is Ocean Nexus Fellow at ANCORS, and she will be talking today as a representative of the Ocean Voices program. Bianca, please.
Hi, and thank you, Tekao. And I would like to thank you all for, sorry, next slide already. I would like to thank you all for the opportunity to present our Ocean Voice project on capacity building initiatives for SIDS, which, as has been mentioned before, is funded by Bloomberg and Oceans 5. So I give this very short presentation on behalf of my colleagues. So as we have heard in the first part of the webinar, SIDS played a really important role during the negotiations for the BBNJ agreement. And the aim of this project is to ensure that SIDS maintain a leadership role. And we do that by strengthening the capacity for SIDS during the ratification and the implementation process. So to support capacity building, we focus on several areas. And first, we will provide national and regional support in the CARICOM and the Atlantic and Indian Ocean SIDS region, with a special focus on Cape Verde and Seychelles and CARICOM countries. We will also foster knowledge and information exchange across SIDS in CARICOM, Atlantic and Indian Ocean, and also the Pacific region. And this will be, for example, done through cross-regional webinars. We will also prepare papers and policy briefs on technical aspects that will be identified by the respective countries and by an advisory panel, which consists of experts from SIDS. And last, this project will support SIDS experts in their effort to raise awareness and to contribute to national and regional ratification processes and to strengthen national capacity. So just to sum it up, this project will run for 2 years, and we are very excited to be here. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bianca. So these were representative of some of the organizations that have been involved in the discussion so far on the implementation of the leader's mandate. But as Commissioner mentioned, we are still, of course, open to additional partners, though you don't have to be our partners to provide support to countries, of course. But the idea is really to build synergies with as many partners who have projects. And in that regard, we are inviting inviting Global Ocean Forum to provide a few words on a program that they are planning in the Pacific on areas beyond national jurisdiction. And so I will invite Miriam Balgos to provide a few words, please.
Thank you, Tekao. Hello, everyone. My name is Miriam Balgos, and I'm happy to share information about a UNEP project on building and enhancing sectoral and cross-sectoral capacity to support sustainable resource use and biodiversity conservation in ABNJ. This project is being executed by the Global Ocean Forum together with WCMC, Grid Arundel, Permanent Commission for the Southeast Pacific, the Office of the Pacific Ocean Commissioner, the Universidad Católica del Norte, and the University of the South Pacific. It is part of the Common Oceans Program coordinated by FAO. The cross-sectoral project, which started in June 2023, has a duration of 5 years and is supported by a Global Environment Facility grant of $2.5 million and co-financing from 23 partners. This is the project organogram, so you can see that the project will be working with national and regional organizations in the Southeast Pacific and Pacific Islands, external advisory bodies, and a project steering committee to achieve its goals. There are wide-ranging human activities and interests in ABNJ, which are set to increase, particularly with the adoption of the BBNJ Agreement. Some of these activities are mapped here along with their respective institutional frameworks that need to be implemented in a harmonized way at various levels. We aim to build and/or enhance functional capacity for sectoral and cross-sectoral cooperation among ABNJ actors in the pilot regions at the national and regional levels. We also intend to improve knowledge sharing about ABNJ issues and governance. These activities will be based on the outcomes of a capacity needs assessment process to be done in year 1, consisting of 4 parts: problem, job, and population analysis and stakeholder validation of results. The development of national ABNJ profiles will be the main tool for problem analysis, for which a protocol is being developed and finalized by the end of February. We look forward to working with national and regional organizations in the Pacific Islands, especially with OPOC and USB, so that we can align project activities with the regional efforts. Please contact us if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Miriam. All right, ladies and gentlemen, as you saw from part 1, the BBNJ agreement to ratify, domesticate, and implement it will require a lot of means of implementation. And the second part, you've met some of the partners who are willing to and ready to provide support for Pacific Island countries to ratify and domesticate the agreement, and at a later stage, prepare for implementation and actually implement the agreement. So that gives us hope for successful BBNJ implementation. I thank you very much for taking the time to attend this webinar. We are really running out of time. We're past 37 minutes. But I think most of the questions that were requested in the survey prior to the webinar have been addressed. The questions in the Q&As have also been addressed by the panelists, and we thank them for that. But again, you will be receiving a survey post webinar, where you can say how long it was, but also if you can identify some questions, some elements that need a deeper dive, if you have some suggestions on how to improve future webinars, but also what type of activities you would like to see. If you are potential partners, please do not hesitate to contact us. Again, thank you so much, attendees, for attending. And thank you so very much, the panelists, for taking the time to give us an overview about this very complex agreement, and for the partners to actually supporting Pacific countries in making this a reality. So without further ado, I shall release you. So thank you very much and see you soon.
Thank you.